What's up YouTube community, welcome back to yet another lesson video. Today's topic is very exciting and much requested. We will check out some killer arpeggio hacks. We will only change one note of these common major and minor shapes and we'll get some pretty exotic sounds by doing that. First, let's check out the practical example I recorded for you this week. So as you can see and hear, aside from the quite crazy example in the end, we are only changing one note for each of these arpeggios. The impact of that can be quite huge, and I want you to learn that you don't always need to study hundreds of different shapes to make your playing more interesting and exotic. A lot of times you only need some very basic music theory knowledge to do all that. So let's check out the first example again and dive a little bit deeper. For the first example, I was playing the very common 3-string arpeggio shape for D minor. There we are working with the notes D, the root, F, the minor third, and A, the perfect fifth. So usually all of these notes that we are playing here are already featured in the chord in the background that we are playing over. That sounds good, and there is nothing absolutely wrong with this approach, but it does get a little bit tiring for the ears when you only work that way. We have a chance to really extend the chords and add some interesting colors to them with our arpeggio phrases, and that is exactly what we are doing with example 1. We change the minor third F here to the major second or ninth E. As you probably know, if you watched some of my videos already, the ninth is one of my absolute favorite tensions. It is equal to the major second, but usually played above the octave of the root in major and minor chords. Hence we refer to it as the ninth and not the major second, at least in the context of chord tensions. Let me know if chord tensions are interesting for you. We can cover this topic in another lesson in the future if you want to. For now, that is all you need to know to understand the basic concept. So this interval has a nice kind of open and floating sound when we include it in the basic chords we usually work with. But we can also add that sound with our arpeggio that we are playing over the chord. As you hopefully hear, it sounds a lot more interesting already when we do that. And it is similar to the suspended approach or sus chords. There we replace the third of the chord with a major second for sus2 chords and with the perfect fourth for sus4 chords. That is a trick that you can almost do in any given situation, so you don't have to worry too much about the key you're in. But it can turn into a problem, as always, when you're adding the major second or ninth to a chord and that note is not featured in the key of the song. An example would be adding E here for D minor, but the song is actually in D Phrygian. There we have a lowered second scale degree in the D Phrygian scale instead of. That means that our major second or ninth that we added to the chord might clash with the characteristic note of the scale if it's played by any other instrument in that situation. So please always remember to think about the notes you are using to enhance your arpeggios in the context of the entire composition and the key you are playing in. Up next we move to the major sound. Here's an example for a C major arpeggio. So as you hopefully see, we can apply our knowledge of the modes to arpeggios too. Everything we learn here is connected. For this example, I'm changing the perfect fifth G to the raised fourth scale degree F sharp, and that is exactly the interval that creates the Lydian sound. The Lydian scale is closely related to the natural major or Ionian scale. We only raise the fourth scale degree here by a semitone, the rest is completely identical. By including this note in my arpeggio, I get a very nice Lydian flavor that I could also use just over a basic regular C major chord. It does get a little bit dissonant there since the raised fourth will rub against the perfect fifth, but all the notes of the C major chord are also found in the C Lydian scale, And that kind of suspenseful sound is actually what we are going for. So if I would play C major chord here, that would be the Lydian interval F sharp. So that already sounds much more interesting and suspenseful than the plain sound of the C major or Ionian scale. So please try it out next time you are improvising in Lydian or whenever you would like to add that killer dissonant Lydian vibe to a composition. Up next we move to minor again. This example is again very similar to the last one. We use our knowledge of the modes again to turn the A minor arpeggio into an A dorian arpeggio. We need to include the major sixth interval in our arpeggio here instead of the minor sixth in A natural minor or Aeolian. But again, I have to pay attention with using this arpeggio in any other context than Dorian. The characteristic major sixth will clash with the minor sixth if it is played by any other instrument. Here's an example of that. I'm playing the minor sixth F on top here of the A minor voicing. That would be the Dorian interval, so that can result in a lot of unwanted tension. The piano parts I wrote for this practical example always include these tiny details in the backing track. I added those characteristic notes to the voicings for the second takes. With all that in mind, let's check out one final example. So this is an example based on the very popular 5-string arpeggio shape that I like to use a lot in my compositions. We work with an A minor arpeggio again, but interestingly exchange the root for the raised 7th of harmonic minor. So technically speaking, we never really have to include the root in our arpeggios since so many other instruments usually play it in the background. And of course it's also the least interesting note you could possibly play over a chord. This is an example of that approach, and you can immediately hear that harmonic minor sound when I play the arpeggio for you. So instead of hammering onto A here, we are playing G sharp, making the stretch a little bit easier. Then we continue with the arpeggio, same notes. But then we change A to G sharp again. Here we have to roll our finger, that is always a little bit challenging, playing those barred parts of the arpeggios, because we don't want the notes to overlap, we don't want it to sound like that. We want to clearly separate the notes by rolling the middle finger here. Then we have to pay attention to the rolling finger motion again. And that is the sound of A harmonic minor. The piano part in the background is playing an A minor major 7th chord found on the tonic in this key. It's a very interesting sound, and I recently made a video about harmonic minor, so make sure to check it out if you would like to dig a little bit deeper into this topic. For now, that's everything I want to show you today. I really hope that you can use all of these hacks for your songwriting or improvisation. Once again, the main thing that I want you to know is that you don't have to study and memorize hundreds of different shapes all the time. You can always adapt the major or minor shapes you already learned to fit your more exotic purposes, so to say. To me, it's a lot of fun to do that, and I constantly come up with new and exciting shapes, so we barely scratched the surface on this topic. Let me know if you want more. In the end, I also really want to thank all my patrons for the support. If you're interested in that, head over to patreon.com/Bernd. I have a huge bonus lesson archive there, lots of different video lessons. I also give feedback and practice plan advice to each individual student, and I also have a really limited Skype lesson tier. I only have 2 more places left there for monthly Skype lessons, so make sure to check it out if that's interesting for you. I will see you in the next lesson. Have a great weekend and have fun practicing.